welcome everyone. I'm Dr. Yvonne Cason. I am the president of Spiritual Awakenings International, and I welcome all of you to our event today. I'm so happy you could join us. We're delighted to have Dr. Christopher Kerr with us today. Born and raised in Canada, but working and living in the United States, a truly international presenter. We are delighted to have him. So I'd like to say to all of you, hello and welcome. Bonjour et bienvenue. Herzliche Willkommen. Hola et buenos dias. Buongiorno. Bon dia. And hello. I said hello to you in 7 different languages because we truly are an international organization. We have subscribers in 37 countries from around the world, which we think is just awesome, from every continent except Antarctica. No penguins have subscribed yet. So we welcome all of you. And even for today's event, we have people attending from Australia, from the United Kingdom, from the USA and Canada. So if we miss the country that you're from, please put it in the chat box. But we welcome all of you from around the world. Welcome to our presentation of Dr. Christopher Kerr. Now, I'm going to turn it over to the Vice President of Spiritual Awakenings International and the co-founder, Robert Bear, who is going to give some opening remarks.
Hello, everybody. Thanks again for attending. I want to go over the format of the meeting so that everybody understands what we're doing. Everyone will be muted except the speaker. And at the very end of the talk of the presentation, we'll have a question and answer period. And you can use the chat box for your questions. And Linda Truax, our secretary, will be doing the screening and participating in facilitating the question and answer period. I want to thank Hospice and Palliative Care Buffalo and Toronto Awakening Sharing Group for co-hosting this event. We've had a tremendous sign up. We've exceeded our Zoom capacity, so we had to actually acquire up into another program. So we're glad that we'll be able to have this go off today. And I'm going to introduce our co-host, Monica Morin from Toronto Awakenings, who will now introduce our speaker. Monica?
Thank you so much, Robert. It comes as an absolutely wonderful surprise to me that I should have the honor of introducing Dr. Kerr today. After my own near-death experience in 2009, from time to time, I would amble through the internet to see what, if anything, new I could find on the topic of death and dying. And on one occasion a few years ago, I found the TEDx talk by Dr. Kerr. And I had no idea we would meet in the future, but I knew that I was grateful that medical scientists were speaking out about the process of death and dying, beyond only the physical, beyond the palliative care models, and going into the very human, touchable, and day-to-day experience of dying. Dr. Christopher Kerr is the Chief Medical Officer and Chief Executive Officer of Hospice and Palliative Care Buffalo. Born and raised, as Yvonne said, in Toronto, Canada, he comes from a long family line of physicians. He has an undergraduate degree in psychology, a doctorate of medicine, and a PhD in neurobiology. He has also received numerous awards throughout his training that have recognized his clinical performance, as well as his success as an educator and scientist. Dr. Kerr's background in research has evolved from bench science towards the human experience of illness as witnessed from the bedside, specifically in patients' dreams and visions at end of life. Although medically ignored, these nearly universal experiences have a profound effect on us. To date, the research team at Hospice Buffalo has published multiple studies on this topic and documented over 1,500 end-of-life events, many of which have been videotaped. This work was the subject of Dr. Kerr's TEDx talk called I See Dead People, Dreams and Visions of the Dying, which has now been viewed over 3 million times. This work has also been the subject of international news, shared on the BBC, the New York Times, the Atlantic Monthly, Scientific American Mind, Huffington Post, the Washington Post, and Psychology Today. And it will also be featured in a documentary film that is currently in the making. Dr. Kerr has also written about his work and research in a book called Death is But a Dream, Finding Hope and Meaning at Life's End, that has now been published in 10 languages. Today, Dr. Kerr will explore how the experiences he and his team have studied often provide comfort and meaning, as well as insight into life and death, how they also bring post-traumatic growth for the experiencer, and he will share the effects these experiences have on those who witness them. So we are very pleased to welcome Dr. Kerr to our forum today. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Kerr.
Thank you. Very kind introduction. Can you see the screen okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start with a bit of a embarrassing disclaimer. I had a different talk prepared, and the Awakenings folks were organized and kind enough to have a rehearsal, and it worked 48 hours ago, I guess it was. And then I had a computer change, and the videos aren't appearing. So I'm using an old lecture, and this is going to be a bit of a challenge because I'm going to free associate a little bit because I don't actually know what's next slide-wise. But there are patient family videos, which I think are really, really important to see because my words really can't capture what I think you're going to see on the video. How this all emerges really a story onto itself. Long story short, I was actually a cardiology fellow. I don't necessarily have a bent towards this at all, which makes me probably a good messenger. I'm kind of the last guy in the church. And what happened was I was moonlighting at hospice in 1999 while I was a fellow. And I was obviously unprepared through training to care for people at the end of life. You know, we have a very curative-based model of healthcare. And I was struck that one, I was ill prepared, but two, that patients at the end of a life were having these profound subjective events. So there was an inner experience to dying that ultimately becomes what it has always been, a human experience. And I was struck by the fact that so many were having these comforting dreams or visions, and they were clearly had therapeutic worth and meaning, and not only for them, but also for their loved ones as well. I was then teaching at the time, and this is really what started the research, was just utter frustration in getting anyone to validate this. And the retort I got usually was, well, there's no evidence. And I'd look in the literature, and it was really case-based or observational. So they were correct. So I originally did the research, and it was IRB, university approved, using validated instruments, et cetera, to really make a case and to help educate. I published it in medical journals, multiple articles, and got essentially actually nothing in terms of a reply. And then what happened was it snuck out and it ended up in the non-medical forms of media, and it went global. And I really can't describe the response, which is still going on to this day. And I'm telling you this because I think it's important. There's this incredible disconnect between the people who are the receiving end of our care and the people who are providing our care. And this matters to patients and families in terms of validating it in a caregiving paradigm. And so many people have had or been witness to these experiences and really haven't been able to contextualize them. So this work matters for that reason. One of the things, interestingly, I did was because I was so frustrated that nobody was believing me, is we videotape patients, which ironically are now going to be part of a Netflix special and a separate full-length documentary. And that's some of the video you're going to see here. And I can't forward it. Oops. So, I guess this is where this begins, which is that if I had to capture what we're attempting to do, it's humanizing the dying process, which is taking it out of an organ-focused approach. People die in totality, and it's more than organ failure, it's the closing of a life. And really that's where this work comes in. This first woman is named Jeanie, and a couple things to know. She's kind of prototypical in that she's describing something that's very vivid. And actually, if you listen to her words, it could be the script for a horror movie, yet she's not unsettled by it. Very little is said between the dreamer and the person in the dream, but ultimately they're comforting and they seem to intuit the meaning. People don't come out of these experiences with questions. The time for therapy is over. They're not asking about the metaphorical interpretation. They just seem to understand what it means to their core. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this issue of delirium or confusion, but to suffice it to say that that is not what this is. As part of our research, patients obviously had to consent. There had to be witnesses. We also screened for confusion before participation. It is not uncommon for patients to be confused prior to death, but it's very important to understand that we're the vantage point. We're not talking about the moments before death, although we see that then. We're talking about the days, weeks, and sometimes even months before death that these experiences are starting to emerge. Confused people are typically agitated. It's defined delirium as disorganized thinking. They're tangential. They're typically agitated and fearful. Thematically, it's horrific stuff by and large. They don't normally recall. They don't give an insight. End-of-life experiences, these subjective experiences, are entirely different. They gain understanding. They're acutely aware. They have full recall, and it has meaning. It has absolute meaning. So the effect on the person is entirely different than a confusional state. So with that said, I'll introduce you to Jeanie.
I think more and more people are getting a little bit more hip to dreams than they were before.
When I think of my mother, I just think of a really vivacious, energetic. She was the type of person that when she walked into a room, it lit up. So when I walked in one morning, she said, I had the most amazing dream. And I said, tell me about it. And she said it was so detailed and so real that she felt that it was actually happening. And
I was laying in bed and people were walking very slowly by me. The right-hand side, I didn't know, but they were all very friendly and they touched my arm or my hand when they went by. But the other side were people that I knew. My mom and dad were there, my uncle. Everybody I knew that was dead was there. And they passed and did the same thing.
she described this as more of an event that she would believe almost happened. She knew that she didn't believe it happened because she woke up and she was at home, but she said it was as if she were in a different place.
Boy, I remember seeing every piece of their face. And I mean, I know that was my mom and dad and uncle and my brother-in-law.
That dream and her successive dreams and experiences made her feel comforted.
I felt good. I felt good to see some people. And the other ones didn't bother me either. I have seen my mother recently more. I can't say that my mother and I got along all those years, but we made up for it at the end.
And she said to me, I'm not crazy, Jewel. And I said, I don't think you are, Mom. It's okay.
When I told my family that I was happy about it, and that's what they asked. How does it make you feel? Well, I feel good about it.
I feel the comfort and the peace that some of these experiences brought to her gave her exactly what she needed to pass on. For me, it affirmed that you're not alone when you die.
I didn't know that video was going to include her daughter, and I'm glad it did. It highlights this notion that people die in the context of their life, and obviously what's good for the patient is good for their loved ones, as you can see with Jeanie and her daughter. A couple of things. One is end-of-life experiences don't deny death. They really transcend it. There's nothing in any of these stories that we hear that are death denying at all. They're more life affirming. And the end result is to validate the life that was led, but also to reduce the fear of what is anticipated. And that's very clear. It's tragic in the sense that people assume that the dying process is a state of immense suffering, when in fact, for many of our patients, it's not. A couple things are also important. What's fascinating is that people tend to, you'll see this theme where people are recalling the most fundamental, foundational relationships in their life. And what that does, it seems, is create this connectivity between and across lives. So she's reaching back to her mother, who's then, this is interpreted by her daughter. And it's really quite remarkable. Time seems to be irrelevant. So you can be 95 years old and you lost your mother at age 5, and it's her voice you hear, and it's her perfume you smell. There's this, we'll see this again in upcoming videos, but there seems to be this phenomena where there's this editing process where the people who withheld or conditioned love are often not included, and the people who loved freely and secured us and nurtured us correctly are the ones that come to surface. So oftentimes you'll see one parent included, but not the other. We've had people who've had 3 husbands, they love the middle one, and that's the person who returns. When we did our first study, one of the things we did is we interviewed patients every day when they were in our inpatient unit, right up until death. And there was a number of reasons why we did that. One was to see the temporal change over time. What happened as people got closer to death. And what we found was there was a dramatic increase in frequency as people approached death in the recording of these events. But more importantly, the content changed. As people got closer to death, they were more likely to report significantly that they were seeing deceased loved ones who they had lost. So that's when the dead return to them, is as they get closer to death, and the increase in frequency is dramatic. What's really interesting is that we tied content of the dream or vision to comfort levels on a 0 to 5 scale, with 5 being the most comforting. And seeing the deceased was associated with the greatest level of comfort. So it's as though there's this built-in mechanism that as you get closer to the end of life, you're having an increased immersion in these experiences, and they're increasingly comforting. So that was thematically, and we've proven this again and again and again. This is oops. This is Paul. Paul's interesting. This is 3 weeks before Paul died, and he's kind of he covers a lot of the bases. So travel is very common. 30 to 40% of people have at least one experience where they're seeing a theme that has to do with travel or preparing to go. What's really interesting about that is that people don't get the obvious metaphor, but that's the way it is. Paul also has dreams or visions of his late wife. And again, little is said, but everything seems to be understood. They're vivid, they're bright, and they're comforting. The other thing we see a lot of is that if you've had an experience that brought you proximate to dying, like going to war, those often come back to you. And again, think of this as you're watching Paul. He's 3 weeks from dying, and what's interesting is he's physically lessening, but emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, he's very vivid and alive. And that's this paradox, really, between what we see outwardly and what patients are experiencing inwardly. So here's Paul.
My father is a remarkable man. He was 82 when he died. He was a fun-loving, very smart, very interesting man, interested in a lot of things and a lot of fun. But Dad was always dreaming about Mom.
I've probably had 15 dreams about her, maybe, somewhere in there. She always wears, I dream in color most times, and she always wears a beautiful light blue. It could be a suit, it could be a gown, it could be a dress, but it's always light blue. And a couple of times she's gave me the little beauty pageant wave, and a couple of times she sort of always with a smile. Only one or twice have I ever heard her voice, but she always kind of lets me know that she's fine. I get that feeling after a dream like that.
My father's experience seeing my mother in his dreams was always good. He never, to my knowledge, had a dream where he was sad or unhappy when he woke up after dreaming about my mother. It was always good. She was always smiling. His feeling always was that she was letting him know she was okay, that this was good and she was all right.
So I had this crazy dream. I'm packing goods, and I'm setting them for some reason up high.
I never had any doubt that what he was dreaming was accurate and that he was reporting it completely to us and enjoying his dreams. He had dreams about his friends in the military. When he was in the Army as a young man, right after my parents got married, he was drafted and sent to Germany, and he would have dreams about his friends.
I'm at Fort Devens up in Massachusetts, where they were forming this company that we're going to oversee, a new company. And the guys are all young. They're like, I remember them, and I'm old. And I'm trying to tell them, guys, I've been here, I've done this, I'm not going to do it again. And they're arguing with me. And that's a crazy dream.
Well, the more I thought about it, the more I appreciated the memories we had of Dad and his dreams, and that we did take some comfort from that. I definitely feel that having those memories of my father's dreams and him sharing them with us keeps us connected, most definitely. My father's dreams definitely changed how I looked at him and what he appreciated in life. Most definitely, he got it down to what was important. His buddies and my mom, and not in that order. Mom. In a way, it makes me think, I hope that that happens to me, that some of my positive memories as a child, as a young adult, maybe as a young mother, will come back again to me, and I'll be able to relive them. This is a part of the whole process, and that when patients, when their family members talk about a dream, listen, because there's a great deal to be learned from what they're sharing with you.
I like how she put that about him putting it in order. And I think if there was one of the most important take-home messages from this work is this idea that people are truly put back together. They're made whole. All of us have scars for having lived, and those also get addressed, whether, as Jeanie said about her relationship to her mother, whether it's to be forgiven or to be reunited, those themes emerge. In our original studies, I think we ended up with 400 to 500 interviews after interviewing everybody daily, and 88% of folks were reporting at least one of these experiences at the end of life. I have a great deal of trouble with the nomenclature. We call them dreams and we call them visions, yet if we're actually listening to what our patient's saying, they're emphatic that these are not like normal dreams. Oftentimes what we hear is, I don't normally dream, or I don't recall my dream, or this was different, or this happened. And you'll hear that again and again and again. It's hard to interpret this. They also talk about visions, yet at the same time, it's not like you walk into a room and people are necessarily pointing around and saying they're having these visions. A couple of interpretations of this. One is that dying naturally includes states of progressive sleep. That really is what dying is. It's a weakening, a lessening, and a pull to sleep. And levels of alertness also change as part of the biologic changes that are occurring. So sleep architecture becomes fragmented and disorganized, and there's phenomena such as lucid dreaming. I guess it's my way of what I'm trying to say is we use these terms of dream and visions, but I'm not so sure they're accurate. Oh, this is interesting. I didn't know this slide was here. This is Beverly, the woman you see here, and just her backstory is kind of fascinating. This is an example of somebody who edited their end of life experiences to include people who loved them in a certain way and exclude those who didn't. So Beverly was raised by parents outside of Cleveland, a mother who was very strict and demeaning, referred to as an ugly duckling, had 2 left feet, would make her scrub furniture with a toothbrush when she came home, etc. There was no open expressions of love or nurturing, and yet she had the opposite relationship with her father, who, interestingly, was named Mentor, and he was a mailman, and their routine at the in life was she would run out of the house, go through the woods, meet him in his clearing, and finish off the mail route with him, hand in hand, and that's where they shared, and that's where she felt most loved. And so you're going to hear her refer to that. She then marries an Irish gentleman who loved song and dance, and that's them on the left going to a dance. They were apparently ballroom dance champions of Northeast Ohio. So he made her feel, in her words, like the princess. So that's her, those are her sources of love, her husband, Mentor, and her husband. What's interesting, just by way of backstory, is those are her 2 children. They were unable to conceive, and they adopted. They did what people did. They went to an orphanage, and they found the child who was expressive, ruby cheeks, and that's the little boy who they adopted. When Beverly left, she felt guilty for a year that she picked the child that they wanted, not the one that most wanted them. So they went back and they picked the most sickly child, who is Susan in the red, and she's the one who's going to be talking on the video. She had been born as a consequence of a rape. The mother had tried to abort. She had a number of medical issues. She was in and out of hospitals, and that's who Beverly and her husband adopted, and that's who's described in the next story. So here's Beverly and her daughter, Susan.
I tell everybody my mother was my best friend. We shared everything. There was nothing that we didn't keep from each other when I was having problems or whatever. I always felt that I was comfortable and can go to her with some of the things that often kids maybe not feel so safe talking about.
Do you dream about your family at all?
My dad?
Your dad?
Yeah. He was one of my favorites.
She woke up one morning and she said, I got to get the route finished. I said, oh, okay, what do you mean by I got to get the, Daddy and I have to get the route finished.
Well, he was a mail carrier.
Okay.
And he would wait for me when he'd come home and I could finish the route with him.
And then this recurred a number of times. Okay, so like say the second time she would say, I have to help with the route. She would start using the names of the people who were in the houses, because after a while, the people who lived in those homes would come out to meet my grandfather, get their mail. And then so she would say, oh, well, Mr. Smith had this blue tie on. And I remember it always seemed like he had a blue tie on Tuesdays. Talk about it. It wasn't like it was past tense, even though I knew this was in a time frame in her past when she was younger, but she talked about it as though she were that age with my grandfather and telling it like she, was with him at that all night, and they'd been doing the route.
I did dream about us dancing, and they had taught us a new dance step. They wanted us to perform it, and I remember that.
It's a nice dream.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful dream.
She would describe the dress or whatever it was, and whoever it was that was playing, whatever band was going to be, at this supper club. And those experiences were real for her and very empowering for me to see she's not frightened. She's not worried at all about what it is. This is joy and happiness. You always worry that they're in pain. And, what I realized was she wasn't in pain. She was living in these moments of joy. I think it's very easy, like, oh, they're drugged up or they're losing their mind. I never once thought my mother was insane or that these were like delusional or whatever. And it doesn't mean there's not the loss, but it made it, this is the pain that's filled with love and great remembrance. And I couldn't have asked for anything better.
I'm just trying to think what the next slide. Okay. I wasn't sure what the next slide was. One of the unfortunate things in doing this research is that we exclude people who are cognitively different for reasons of consent. It's hard enough doing research, which is a whole story unto itself, on people who are at the end of life. It's another thing to do research on people who are questioned on consent. What's unfortunate in that is that the folks with dementia, Down syndrome, etc., who are detailed in my book, actually have some of the most richest end-of-life experiences. What gets lost, unfortunately, particularly with dementia, is we talk about them medically in terms of their deficits, what they aren't cognitively. And what's obscured in that is the fact that of folks who are cognitively different have rich emotional lives and histories and identities and tones and textures, and they're there and they're vibrant, and it really doesn't matter whether they know who the president is or not. They're experienced to their core. I tell the story in the book of a young woman named Sammy who was in her late 30s and had Down syndrome, had always had very strong maternal instincts, carried dolls, etc. And as she had ovarian cancer, which gave her ascites, or a fluid accumulation in her belly, and she interpreted that as being her baby. So as she was ending her life, she felt she was giving life, and she just held tighter to her babies. This next video is interesting. Sue is describing her mother, who very close to dying, actually. She has her mother had advanced dementia, very close to dying. She's trying to escape the nursing home. And keep in mind that we're in Buffalo and we're right near the wedding capital of the world, which is Niagara Falls. And as I won't give it all away, but basically as she's dying, she's actually reliving the best day of her life. Her mother is, and immersed in love. So here's Sue.
So there was a lot of talk about, I had a dream last night and Gary was there, or Gary came to visit me, or we had dinner together. And she got to the point where she didn't even talk about it in terms of dreams. She talked about, I had dinner with your dad and Gary last night.
Wow.
That was not every day, but probably 2 or 3 times a week within the last year or 6 months.
So pretty frequent.
Pretty frequent. And she was very animated about it, very happy. And she didn't even talk about them as dreams. To her, they were something that happened last night. So they made me feel wonderful, because as I was getting off the elevator and thinking, I'm wondering what we're going to talk about today, because sometimes she didn't remember what they did during the day while I was at work, or maybe who else was there, but she always remembered her dream or vision or whatever she had. When I saw her that day, I was like, Mom, why did you go outside? You never go outside. You know, somebody's supposed to go with you. And she looked at me like, well, I was going to meet your father. And I said, well, where were you going? How were you going to get there? And she just kind of looked around. Well, that wasn't the issue. The issue was that she was going to meet him. So then I didn't know what to say at that point, and I said, well, where were you going? And she said, well, we were going to Niagara Falls to get married. Life was different for her those last couple months because she had like something to talk about, something to look forward to. And those dreams were pepping her up, were making her happy, were making her almost look forward to go to sleep, which I think is great. Seeing that and being a part of it is a gift. And it was a gift for me. And I think it's a gift that should be shared. That at the end of our life, there's a lot of spiritual, emotional work that is being done and changes that are happening that, I don't know, are we too afraid to recognize it, or you think there's not enough time or whatever. But I think it's as important, if not more important, than the physical things that we have to check off on the chart.
So we're seeing this overarching theme again and again. As people are approaching death, you'd expect escalating psychogenic distress when actually the inverse is happening. And again, this idea that people are put back together. So she's actually, her mother, like many of our patients, become almost more immersed in the experience when their eyes are closed. And really, again, it's recalling the best parts of having lived. I'm going to pass on Andre. Most of us can identify with this beautiful refrain from Dylan Thomas: do not go gently into the good night, rage, rage, rage against the dying of the light. It's beautiful, it's lyrical, but it's probably not accurate. Where Dylan Thomas was imagining death, he actually wasn't experiencing it. And I think this is probably what we get most wrong when we conceptualize the dying experience or theorize about it. Our patients actually aren't fighting anything. They're not going against anything, they're going towards something. And it's whatever it is tends to be immersed in these experiences at the end of life. This next video is actually one of my favorites. I'm not sure all that's included in this video, but how much of it's there. But Horace is near death, and pay attention to a few things. He's describing the remembrance and the visualization, the experience of feeling his wife's presence again. And what's fascinating is he becomes overwhelmed emotionally. With strongly positive feelings, to the point that he has trouble finding words. And this is somebody who isn't fearing anything at all. Oops.
There's this just mass green, like a pasture of green, green grass. But again, hard to describe because it was a color green that I've never seen before. It was so vivid and so, it was like lifelike. And it felt good. My wife all of a sudden appeared, and I'm thinking, oh, this is even better yet. She had a certain smile about her that it was kind of like a joke. It was like I got you. And I'm wondering, what is the joke? Really, why can't you talk to me? She just And there's just no conversation.
Yeah.
Well, she was always beautiful to me, but she was even prettier. She was. She knew me inside out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or maybe I guess maybe words weren't necessary. We just looked at each other and knew exactly what one was thinking. It was just a good time. I don't know. But everything had left you, there was no problems. No, everything was happiness. It was like you wish the world was really felt good.
Yeah.
Felt like there was when you finish paying a bill that had been bugging you for years.
Relief.
It was that relief that it was gone. And it was, it was just a relief. Everything was okay.
We published a study I think is really interesting. We looked at dying as the potential for post-traumatic growth. This idea that there's a negative experience, but that there can be positive outcomes, even in things like war. And there's actually validated instruments to assess this. And so what we did is we used those post-traumatic growth instruments, and we studied patients who were having end-of-life experiences and compared it to people who weren't. And what we found was fascinating. People who were having end-of-life experiences actually showed high levels of post-traumatic growth. So again, back to this idea of this paradox in dying, this paradigm shift, that there's not just a negative, lessening, empty experiences, but they were actually gaining insight and understanding and acceptance right up until their last days. And it just came through again and again. Just trying to think what's like. So dying is more than a medical treatment. It's a closing of a life. And again, hospice, among the things hospice gets right is the unit of care is not just the patient, but their loved ones. And we've done a lot of work studying the effect of end-of-life experiences on the bereaved. I think we can all understand that looking down at a loved one who's nearing the end of their life, there's the outward that we see and experience and the grief that we're anticipating. Beyond that, our fear is, where are they inside? What is their experience? Are they okay? And what we found in surveys and interviews of, I think, over 750 bereaved family members is these events are overwhelmingly positive. Not only that, they absolutely affect the bereavement process. So we've looked at grief processing tools, and loved ones who witnessed end-of-life experiences process loss and adapt very differently and in ways that are more healthy. This is Norb describing his wife's end of life.
He started like chanting, "I'm going home, I'm going home," over and over and over again. And that's kept up almost all afternoon. I'd give her a drink or something, bring her bed up, and as I brought her bed up, her head would go up and still stare at the ceiling real hard. About, I'll say right around 3 o'clock, I said to her, "What are you staring at so hard up there?" She says, "It's the angels. They're coming down to take me home to heaven." And those were the last words that I ever heard her speak. She was total content. She had been fighting cancer for about 13 years prior to that there. And I knew that now she was at total ease. She's done. It was the end, and she realized that she was happy that she was gone.
And how does that make you feel?
It put me at ease also, knowing that. It's been hard at times to grieve her loss, but knowing how she died, what mood she was in when she died, has put me at great ease over it, really.
Now, do you think, often about that experience? Do you ever revisit
Oh yes,
it?
oh yes, I think of it there a lot, and still, how I can hear her chanting over and over and over again. It's made me feel at ease, knowing that she was at total at ease when she died. It wasn't that she was suffering or anything. She was happy that she was going, and the angels were coming to get her. Definitely has been ease as far as my grieving over her loss, knowing that, hey, that she was at ease when she died. Who do I want to dream of? Her waiting for me up at the gate. She's the love of my life, and I want to be back with her.
Is there anything else you would like medical professionals who take care of people who are dying to know about these experiences?
I think it's a field that really should be looked into deeply. That it's something that affects everybody. It affects everybody differently. The person that's losing somebody it affects, as well as the person that goes. And what their feelings are at the time has a great effect on the survivors, so as to speak. And to know that they went out happy, in a good mood, not suffering, hey, that's the main thing.
I just want to see a couple of slides where there we are. Oops. We tend to romanticize experiences at the end of life, this idea of great religious insights gained or epiphanies. And actually, what most people dream about are themes of love or themes of forgiveness, but they're founded in our again, in relationships. How those relationships are re-experienced tends to be more in what seems like more mundane aspects of living, but really that give our life meaning. And this story kind of captures it. It's about sauce.
So this is the one and only picture that exists of Patrick and I that was snapped by my niece at a wedding, because neither one of us are overly photogenic and it just wasn't our style. And this picture, because we did not live together, we each owned our own home, went back and forth for 15 years on each other's mantles. Patrick didn't cook with one single exception of making his grandmother's sauce, which he did, I want to say, about every 4, 6, 8 weeks through the entire 16 years I knew him. Patrick was the only member of his family that knows how to make the sauce. And for all the years I knew him, he insisted something was missing.
After his grandmother had passed?
After she had passed, and she had passed well before I had ever met him. I even tried to help him make it once, and I got banned from the kitchen because he insisted that an Irish woman was no way could ever make old-fashioned Italian sauce like Grandma used to make. Fast forward to, this would be the Sunday before he passed. He woke up in the morning and I couldn't get him to eat. He wasn't hungry, total loss of appetite. And I'm like, baby, we got to make you something for breakfast. What do you want? He goes, I'm full. I said, Pat, you had a snack pack pudding yesterday. You're not full. And he's like, oh, no, I ate with Nana Dolores last night. As real as I'm sitting here, he believed he made sauce with his grandmother the night before, said he could smell it, he could still taste it, he was full from it, and she showed him, after all these years, what he had done wrong, which is the very last step before you take it off the burner, was to add a teaspoon of sugar. It was so very real for him, to the point, there I am, putting on sweatpants, driving to the grocery store, because we spent the next 7.5 hours, because that's how long it takes, making his grandmother's sauce that day. So, and he was so sick, and it was the only day I was ever allowed to help him. As he sat on the bar stool, and, well, let's say was very strict with the orders of the sauce, and we kept bringing the pot over, so there are certain things only he could do. We made the sauce, he added the sugar. Last time Patrick ever ate. Every morning he woke up saying, "Is today the day I'm going to die?" And I said, "You'll go when you're ready." And he was ready.
He was ready. And you knew he was ready.
And I knew he was ready from this.
Yeah.
I think this is a man who is at peace and very honest. If your last dream in life is about spaghetti sauce, there's nothing more peaceful than that. It didn't appear to be a memory. To him, it appeared that he was participating. And that's one of the things I found very different.
Did that dream help you accept that reality further?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely. And not only the reality that he is gone, it's made me think of maybe there is something out there after we go.
I'd like to end, because I think my time is running out, maybe we're going a little bit over, just focused on children. So we have a large palliative care program with over 100 kids. I actually oversee the program. We have not included children in our formal studies, so we have published case series on this. And obviously children are different for a variety of reasons. They often lack language for death, the concepts of mortality, this notion that their faith is anew, as Emily Dickinson so beautifully put it. But they have intense end-of-life experiences that often inform them in very interesting and unique ways. They may not have known somebody who died, but they often know animals who have died. And as you'll see, the return of them gives the same message, which is, according to the children's own words, that they're not alone and that they're loved. I believe this video is of Jeanie, and I don't know what clips are all included in here, but a couple of interesting things, that depending on how much of the video is here, is when she's described her end-of-life experience, she actually creates her own world that includes security. She always dreamt of a castle, and she'll tell you what that means. And I'm not sure, again, what's in the video, but she saw at least 6 or 7 animals, pets that she knew of, between friends, neighbors, and relatives. And well, I'll let her tell the rest. Here's Jeanie.
When I was sleeping, like deep sleep, my Aunt Miriam came down to bring me up to heaven, and she was playing with me with Barbies.
Okay. So when you saw her, she looked good?
Yeah.
Was she smiling?
Yeah.
Okay.
She had to wear.
She what?
She had to wear oxygen.
Okay.
Because she was very old.
Uh-huh. Did she wear the oxygen in the dream?
No.
She looked better then?
Yeah.
Okay. And you got to play Barbies with her?
Yeah.
Do you dream of any animals?
Yeah.
What type of animals do you dream of?
My cousin's dog that passed away.
What was the dog's name?
Moose. I see Daisy. That was my grandma's dog. Daisy. She passed away.
Okay. And so you get to play with that dog in your dreams?
Yeah.
What does all of this mean to you? You get to see all these animals. That's kind of neat, huh?
Yeah.
So these dreams, is it fun to go to sleep to think about what you're going to see?
Yeah.
Okay. Doesn't scare you then?
No.
Okay. And when you see your aunt, where are you?
In a castle.
Really? Is it beautiful?
Yeah.
Huh.
It's huge.
Describe it for me. Are there other people there?
No.
Okay. Is it warm?
Yes.
Is it sunny?
There's a window that you can see the sun through it.
Uh-huh.
And it has God on the window.
Like a church would?
Yeah.
Okay. That sounds beautiful. So this is a pretty special place.
And then there's a piano.
Mm-hmm.
And then a pretty painting of a baby. The little baby. No, the church.
Yeah, like in a church. In a manger kind of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think the castle is? What does it mean?
Safe place.
Safe place. Yeah. Safe place, and it's sunny and it's warm. And your aunt's there.
And then they have a pool.
Really?
A built-in pool.
Whew! You like to swim?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You nailed it. And you got the world's best smile. Is there anything else we should know about you?
That I'm beautiful.
You are beautiful.
Right before she went to sleep yesterday, I heard her voice in the bedroom over my baby monitor, and I thought maybe she was calling me, so I asked her, "What did you say?" And she said nothing, and then I heard her voice again, and I thought, what the heck, who was she talking to? So I went in there, and she said she was talking to God, and that he was a very old man, but a very good-looking, cute man, and that he was going to make her all better, and that she was going to go live up in the castle with my Aunt Miriam, who she had been talking to as well. And that there's a big, huge bed there. And I let her know that we were all going to be there together someday, that Mom was going to come there too someday when it's my time. And she said, and God will make you all better when you get there.
What does it all mean for you?
Well, it kind of helps. I mean, sometimes I think it's real. For real? Are you really talking to God? I don't know. After the conversation with God and after my talk with her, she's been just calm. She off and on would talk about the castle and how beautiful it was there. It was warm. There was a swimming pool there. And I still think about that all the time, because now when it rains out, I kidly tell her, "Would you stop jumping in your pool, Jeanie? We would like some sun, thank you." It was a beautiful thing to hear because it just helped. Yeah. It doesn't seem like it because I'm crying, but it does help. Jeannie's dreams and visions have helped my grieving process most of the time. Sometimes I'm human and I'm doubtful, but I hear her in the back of my head all the time saying, "No, Mom, there's a castle. I'm waiting for you up here." Yeah, it's helpful because I really truly want to believe that there's a heaven, that there's something, that I'll see her again.
Yeah.
And because of how strongly she believed in it, I can't not believe in it.
Sure.
If we talk about regular medical doctors, I would like them to listen to the patients when they're talking about dying and death, and dreams and visions, and they need to believe them.
I think I'm going to end there. Just an interesting thing about Jeanie. Actually, people don't dream of religious symbols or interpretations very often. Actually, they dream of their pets far more often than they see crosses, etc. One interpretation of this that's beautifully written by a pastor by the name of Kerr. We're not the first who have demonstrated that. Others have as well. Is that they don't dream of the symbols necessarily or interpret those iconic figures of faith. They do dream of the themes are consistent with the tenets of faith, being love and forgiveness. Jeannie's story is particularly interesting because she'd actually never been to church. Her family wasn't religious. But what happened at the end is she was describing, I didn't know that was in the video. There was a baby monitor that the parents listened to, and they heard her talking, and this was started on a Monday. And when Mom went into Michelle went into Jeannie's room, she said, "Well, what do you want?" She goes, "Nothing." She goes, "Well, I hear you on the monitor." She said, "Yeah, I'm talking to God." And the conversation continued, and that was the last day she spoke. When I went back and we filmed the mom. That was on the Friday, and she passed on that Saturday, so less than a week. So I'm just going to close this out, and there we are. I can't hear anybody.
It's okay.
There we are.
Dr. Kerr, I am trying to get the spotlight.
It's on you, Linda.
Okay.
Spotlight's on you.
Okay, sounds good. Wonderful dialogue there. I'm hoping you can see some of the chat that's going on, and you'll be able to preserve that. There's an important question at the end that might help answer a lot of the questions we've already gotten and or will come up. And that is, I understand you've got a Netflix documentary coming up. Can you give us the title and the estimated date of release?
The estimated date is it's January, and I think it might be Beyond Death. The executive producer is somebody named Ricky Stearns. It's actually, I'm one episode of a 6-part docuseries, but they have a lot of afterlife focus in it. The other is public television, which is going to be in 80% of the homes in the United States. That's a full-length documentary, and that's called, same as my book, Death is But a Dream. And that's going to come out starting in February, run for 6 months. And because WNEDR public television is shared with Southern Ontario, you'll be able to see that as well in Southern Ontario. So that's coming up.
That sounds great. Yeah, I believe we do get Beyond Death in my region also. So one of the first questions was a request if you could give a little bit more information on any clients you had a chance to talk to who are cognitively undeveloped, declined. And any other accounts, you did share one with us, but was there another one that comes to mind? How clear were they in expressing their dreams?
Yeah, very. Actually, one of them is my partner's mother. And he's actually I believe he's in the Netflix show. And this is it's a convoluted story. I'll try to tell quickly. But basically, she had left Europe as from the Nazi invasion, and she had had a number of losses, and her life after immigrating to the United States it was overshadowed by her earlier experiences, which were pretty horrific. And she was described as difficult. If she was missing the remote control, she would blame the Nazis. She just was. It colorized her view, and she was the sort of person who people kind of endured visiting. She also lost a child at the age of 3, my partner's brother. And then what happened is she got closer to the end of her life. This is it's hard to describe. She became less focused on those memories and more immersed in positive, loving ones. And she would put a picture of her deceased son in front of her and blow him kisses and talk to him regularly. So she actually, and it changed her whole personality. So she had always been rude to the care staff in the nursing home, and she became instead gracious and respectful and kind. So her whole personality reverted to her better self because she was re-experiencing the uplifting pieces of having lived. It got so pronounced that they had to put blankets over all of the mirrors because she would scream and said, "Who is that horrible person in the mirror?" when she saw herself. So what they did was they surrounded her apartment with pictures from her distant past, because folks with dementia often can tell you, what the dress they wore to the high school prom, but can't tell you what they had for breakfast. But she became completely a different person and lived much more within her end of life experiences.
And most of those I'm hearing are positive, and that's echoed by one of our attendees is Teresa DeSico, who has also done dream research for 20 years, and she amplifies what your findings were, that many of them are positive. But there is somebody asking, and it's Carol and Jim, did you have any of your subjects discuss negative people or experiences during those final dreams?
Yeah, and actually that's the best video that we have. I didn't show it because it's lengthy. Okay, so here's a quick story. We were naive when we started, and we had boxes that said, are these experiences comforting, discomforting, or neither? And 17% said they were discomforting. What was lost in that is the discomforting experiences were actually the most transformative. And so they ended up being by far and away the most meaningful. And again, the thing to take away is that these experiences don't deny the hard parts of having lived. You're not reinvented at the end of your life. But I'll give you an example. The guy in the film who will be in both the documentary and the Netflix. Very quickly, he was in his 40s, and he came from multi-generational impoverishment and polysubstance abuse. He started using crack in his early teens. He had been in prison more than out in his life. He had murdered 2 people in self-defense on the street, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He ends up with head and neck cancer, and he's being filmed. Now, he had a life that he couldn't afford to look backwards or with regret. So he never spoke of anything like that. Instead, he was a clown. He was bright. His nickname was the mayor because he was always greeting people. So he's being interviewed, and he's his normal jovial self, and we're asking him about his dreams. And of course, he says that they're all sexual and he can't describe them. And then we said anything else, and he completely breaks down on film. Like it's incredibly powerful to see. And it turns out what he's dreaming about is that he's being stabbed in his neck where his open wounds were by the people who he had harmed. And he's pleading that he was sorry and that he was under the influence of drugs and he really was a good person. And what happened was he then asked to see a daughter. And for the first time, so she comes in, and for the first time, he acknowledges how regretful he was and how deeply he loved her. She then stayed with him, and I think he lived for probably another 2 weeks, and he slept peacefully and passed peacefully. The most moving one for me personally, just because I was there and it's almost hard to describe, I describe it in the TED Talk, and his kids are interviewed actually. There's a guy from Texas named John Stinson, great Texas name, Jack Stinson. Anyways, he at 17 was on the USS Texas in the invasion of Normandy, and it was a large battleship and they were far from shore. There was an American group of soldiers who were trapped and they were getting slaughtered under a cliff. So they sent a rescue boat. He was on that. And for 67 years, he was traumatized. He never slept well for 67 years. He didn't go to any VA events, parades, or anything. He could never deal with the war. And he also never discussed any of this until the end of his life, when actually his son said he learned more about him through his end of life experiences than he knew in his life. And what he dreamt about was that he was seeing all the blood and the bodies around him, and he couldn't sleep. And then one night we go to see him, and he goes, I had the greatest sleep. And what happened was he had two dreams. One was he got to relive the best day of his life, was when he got his discharge papers. The second dream was that soldiers came to him on a beach and said, we're coming for you now. And something in that dialogue freed him of either a guilt or something. And as I write in the book, what's remarkable is you could have gone through decades of talk therapy, medications, and nothing would have done the healing that he experienced himself at the end of his life. And he died peacefully. What was interesting was I don't say this in the TED Talk, they said, we're coming for you in 7 days. And actually, that's exactly when he died, was 7 days later. So we have lots of experiences. It's, again, back to this idea, whatever your wound was seems to get addressed. So we had a fellow who lost his arm at the age of 8, and he came from a working class family with little resources, and he wondered how he was going to survive in a blue collar world. And his mom sent him to a reform school just so he could get a better education. Anyways, so that sort of injury, psychologically, obviously, it has a depth that you don't shake, and that became a core to his identity. And at the end of his life, of course, he dreams of his coworkers coming by him, all who have died, and telling him he was the best person at his job, validating him. So it's always this idea of being put back together. But again, it doesn't just deny the discomfiture of having lived.
I can appreciate that. I've got some questions coming in asking about like type activities, terminal lucidity versus the dreams and nearing death awareness, all which are also very well documented. I'm going to try to focus on some of these questions dealing with the dream aspect and something that you said in the presentation, and that's the post-traumatic growth with those experiences you just shared. After they reviewed those traumatic things in their life, they had growth. They actually expressed that before their passing.
Yeah, measurably so. It seemed as though they gained, dying, if you think about it, more than any other time of life, except maybe for giving birth, is a vantage point that changes not only your perspective, but even your perception. And that does not come without consequence. And I think that's what gets lost. We're so distracted by the physical states that we see and by the grief that we're anticipating that we miss that something else is happening. And when you hear people talk about the sauce or Norb or whatever, they're having a different experience that's enlightening, and people relay that to us again and again and again.
Okay. And I had from Deborah, do you see that people die in the manner that they lived? And did their attitude change? Or is there a distinct change generally? And what I'm hearing from your accounts that you're sharing is, for a couple of them, there are distinct changes in their attitude toward life as they get ready to actually pass.
Yeah, no, I think you die as you live. But I think there's a greater depth of forgiveness in the story than we think. I think you saw that in Dwayne, the drug addict who had murdered people. There's something that happens where the best parts seem to be addressed. So I don't think you're put on a suffering trajectory. We don't see that. We just don't.
Okay. Dina, I'm not sure I've got your question. um, working with the less verbal dying persons, you've observed they're making gestures or using atypical language that seems to convey their connection to the dream visions. So their vocabulary seems to change. They're using iconology. I think I kind of heard that when you talked about taking a trip. I'm getting ready to take a trip and travel.
Yeah. I'm not sure if this answers the question, but we often see people revert to the language that they were raised in. We see it all the time. We have a heavily Polish community, so it's not uncommon to see them return. Again, it goes to this idea that time becomes irrelevant. So you're often going to your childhood relationships, your formative relationships and years. And so the language that was spoken then is what's often spoken in now.
I think the ones that got to participate in your study are very fortunate. It would be Germ was asking, do you think it's a natural phenomena that most all people experience toward the end of life to have these dreams, which help them get ready to transition? For those that were in your study, I'm thinking they were very fortunate to have somebody not only ask questions, but to listen to their accounts.
Well, you know, it's actually, there's a story within this, the research, which is that this is incredible that, so the university, it was a fight to get this through, obviously. But what's amazing is nobody who approached ever declined. And that included in the book. And if you think about it, it's phenomenal because people sometimes were days before dying. There was no secondary gain. They even got filmed. In some pretty compromising ways. And it's because what seemed, there's a better story in that they still wanted to be connected. They still wanted to have relevance and they still wanted their voices to be heard right up until the very end. And I think that's the thing we most get wrong about how we treat dying. We sterilize it, particularly from a medicalized perspective. And we put people on the shelf and we make what is inherently lonely more lonely and isolating. And we treat them as though they're frail in a way that they can't bond. And what came through in this research I would love to write the paper on this, is how people wanted to participate. And they're not telling a polished version of themselves. They're telling about the hardest parts of having lived a life. And it's very self-revealing. In the book, there's a cop who goes on a confessional about all the lousy things he's done in his life that were really criminal. But I guess you get an unvarnished honesty. But I'm struck that people participate the way they do.
Well, we talked about the post-traumatic growth of your clients, but what about yourself? There is a question here.
Oh.
Doing this research, has it affected you personally or professionally? And if so, how?
That's the one I try to avoid the most. We've done a couple of things in doing this research. One was that we were very deliberate in not adding an interpretive element to it. So we didn't want it to be, have an overlay of religiosity, afterlife, or whatever. We wanted to just view the dying experience as a mystery unto itself rather than a keyhole to look beyond. That's for other people. We just really wanted to translate the world. Yeah, it absolutely has affected me. How it has affected me is that I think there's a better story than probably the one that I thought existed. You can't do this work and listen to our patients and not come away from it thinking that it's not as dark and as empty and as lonely. And having lived isn't matters, and that there's this connectivity across the lives. I think what most hits me, again, I use the example of the 95-year-old who smelled his mother's perfume, who he lost at age 5. That actually happened. So that was somebody in our research, and I just thought how absolutely beautiful that after 95 years and 90 years in absence and disconnected physically, at least from his mother, that's where he gets returned to. I don't know if it gets any better than than that. And actually what he said was, not only he saw him, he felt himself, he dreamt that he was a boy again before she died. And he could smell the cooking, he could smell her perfume, and he actually heard her voice whispering, "I love you." And you can argue at what reality is all of this occurring. I can tell you that that was his lived experience. At the end of 95 years, that's where he gets brought back to. So yeah, I guess it's a better version.
Okay. And
I also, by the way, like the idea that there doesn't seem to be any punitive stuff in this. When you think of all the religious interpretations, and the talk of sin and retribution and whatnot, those aren't the stories we hear. We hear, and honestly, you hear more about people's childhood puppies than you hear of things like that.
Well, that kind of answers one of the other questions that came in from the Phillips family. When caring for end-of-life patients, do they ever have regrets about life? And if so, what are those regrets, and were there any commonalities in what they expressed?
No, it's, I wish no. I think that's the one thing that becomes clearer over time is the time for therapy is over. People aren't talking about, I wish I could have, I did. I mean, you're just left with what you got. It happened. You're at the end. There's no, you can't press redo or pause. There isn't time to analyze, interpret, speculate. It doesn't happen like that. What they do is they come out of this and say, I mean, every patient you heard from, not one of them posed a question. Not one of them philosophized. There was no epiphany. They just said, hey, I experienced this love or this presence. And again, that's why that sauce video, I think, is so important. It's simple. And she said it so beautifully. It wasn't like a dream. It was like a memory, or it happened. And the other thing I love that she said was that guy woke up, okay, he's cachectic as hell. He had a fruit pudding or something in one or over a 2-day period, but he actually felt full. So again, it really, it's primal, it's visceral, but it's this idea then that you're actually restored, and you don't need to analyze beyond that. I can't tell you how many people want to interfere on this. People have said, well, you really need a psychologist in here to sit and talk with them. And I no, there's no space, but there's no asking for it. And they're not asking either to talk to their priest. You don't need a translator. You don't need a messenger. You just need your own humanity to feel what you were meant to feel, I think.
Okay. From Deborah, I've got have you ever worked with anyone who made a choice to end their life? That in Canada, we have the MAID program.
Yeah, I have, with people with particularly things like Lou Gehrig's disease. It happens way less frequent than the media would lead you on to believe. I mean, good palliative care, I think, addresses the issues without addressing the issue. But yeah, I have, and they had the same similar experiences. And our studies are can be criticized, and we're looking at hospice patients, right, who know they're dying and elected to acknowledge and accept that they're dying at some level. And so what happens in acute death? And the answer is I don't know. But you wonder, you think of George Floyd as those bastards were leaning on his neck and taking away his life. He seeing his mother and calling to his mother. Even the expression, I saw my life pass before my eyes. I don't know.
It's kind of related to that type of situation. We did have from Sarah, have you ever heard of these kinds of experiences happening with the more rapid deaths, i.e. In the ER acute care settings when the person has less time to integrate the dying process?
Yeah, I was an ER doctor on the side for 12 years, and I certainly heard people calling out to a parent or a child. I've never known how to interpret that, whether that was a cry for help or a cry to reunite. I'm not sure, but there's something to it, I think.
Okay. Somebody else, I didn't get their question. Sarah, I just got your question. Germ, it says, Dr. Kerr, I guess the elephant in the room in all this is that are these dreams and or visions an indicator of a continuity of a soul or personal consciousness after physical death, and wondering what you feel about your research? What does it suggest?
Well, it's a tough crowd. Yeah, I think that I'm less interested in questions of the brain and more interested in questions of the mind. And so I'm less concerned about and interested in my background as a neurobiologist, less interested in the organicity of this event and much more in mind soul events. You mentioned terminal lucidity, which is real and kind of science defining. You can have advanced neurodegenerative diseases, and we see this clinically all the time. And people have rekindled memories that again are always, in my experiences, positive. I think it does go towards an abstraction. I think for me, the bigger point is I'm good with it not being understood or labeled. I think in the end, I think it defies our understanding in some ways, and all we're left with is reverence. I think we need to have reverence for it. If it's okay that people are having a reality that isn't ours, our lack of understanding doesn't deny their experience, I guess, and that's all that matters. I resist kind of dissecting it and speculating, because what that does is polarize the camps between people who can only see through a concrete lens, where if it's not imageable, biopsiable, measurable, it therefore doesn't exist. And it's so funny, we don't do that with emotions like love. We just know it. And I view this in the same realm, is that this just is. It just is. And I think what's interesting is that more and more I lose faith that it belongs in the domain of medicine at all. I mean, we're more spot welders than ever. It's vogue to talk of whole person care, but we actually do very little of it. There's actually data that the more doctors involved in the case, the less people actually know about what's happening. So there isn't somebody who, you bring in renal and pulmonology and cardiology and and you approach humanhood from pieces. And what happens is dying is that it's life in its fullest spectrum. So the myopic world does not going to see or value any of this. And I don't think it's going to change, because we're too enamored with our technical capacities that we don't step back and just look at the person anymore. So where I hope the advocacy comes from is from people outside of the medical spectrum. I mean, the people who really brought me to the bedside were really social workers and volunteers who knew better, and pastoral care folks. So.
Well, Dr. Kerr, I want to say that I appreciate the fact, one, you had the courage to approach people and ask the questions and to listen to them. And I'm getting that as sort of closing comments from others. Wendy says, thank you so much, Dr. Kerr. And SAI, fantastic presentation and dialogue today. Deborah felt what your closing was very well said. And Dina wants to share, all we are left with is reverence. Thank you, Dr. Kerr.
Thank
Our humanity and emotions go beyond our rational mind's ability to understand. And we hope to be able to do some of these again in the future. But right now, I think I need to turn this over to somebody and start closing out questions and answers.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Kerr.
Thank you.
On behalf of the Toronto Awakenings Sharing Group, and I know I speak as well for Spiritual Awakenings International and Palliative Care Buffalo, that was so beautiful. The voices that you shared, the stories, so profoundly life-affirming and comforting, and really kind of revolutionary for the medical system. As a doctor as well, I know how much this really alters how we might approach the care that we provide. So from both sides, I also just deeply appreciate what you've shared. I think it helps us to see life a bit differently as well as death. So much gratitude.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to piggyback onto what Dr. Shira Taylor just said, and thank you also, Dr. Kerr. It was fantastic, a fabulous presentation. And again, thank you to the Toronto Awakening Sharing Group and the Hospice and Palliative Care Buffalo for, of course, co-sponsoring this event. And I'd like to remind everybody that Spiritual Awakenings International, we have these speaker events. We present them usually the third Saturday of each month. And we will be doing one in collaboration with Seattle Ions. It'll feature Dr. Yvonne Cason, who's going to talk on everything you need to know about near-death experiences. That is next Saturday, if you'd like to follow us on that. Also, we have a tremendous series lined up for the beginning of the year. We have a Circle of Honor where we honor people that have been pioneers in the NDE and STE realm. And we have, besides Dr. Cason, we have 3 others that are speaking back to back to back. And that'll be Dr. Emma Bragdon, Dr. Bonnie Greenwell, and Dr. Jeffrey Long, January, February, and March. So please check out our website. Please subscribe. Please tell your friends. And again, in January, Dr. Emma Bragdon is going to talk about Brazilian Spiritus healers. It'll be fascinating. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Cason. Thank you, everybody. This was a wonderful event. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I want to thank everybody for coming, and any of you who are watching who've not yet subscribed to our SAI mailing list, please go on our website and sign up so you get announcements about our upcoming events. So thank you, Dr. Christopher Kerr. That talk was phenomenal. And for all of our listeners and around the world, by the way, we had someone right in the chat, they were tuning in from Hong Kong. So we had someone from Hong Kong, from Australia, all across the United States, all across Canada, and a couple people from the UK. So thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing everyone next time. So on behalf of everyone here, I'd like to say goodbye to everyone. Au revoir, auf Wiedersehen, adios, buenos tardes, arrivederci, dag, farvel, and ciao. Bye, everybody.